Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. We'll go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you are able, go ahead and stand. Thank you so much. City Attorney, can we have a report out on the closed session?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The council did meet on one item regarding real property negotiations at the location noted on the agenda. Council provided staff direction on price and terms, and no further reportable action was taken.
Thank you. And then just so my colleagues in the community know, we are going to swap 7B and 7A when we get to the public hearing section. And we'll have our auditor will be joining us via virtual Zoom. All right, well, City Manager, will you, actually, before we start, I just also wanted to say thank you to our Assembly person, our Senator, Assemblywoman Addis, Senator Laird, and Congressman Carbajal for meeting with us over the weekend. Your City Manager, myself, and a few other individuals as well. We got to meet at Nautical Bean on Saturday with the owner there and share kind of some of the challenges the business has experienced through the floods, and also looking at the FEMA opportunities to help community members, whether it's individuals, ag, or businesses. So we're working hard to advocate, and here we go. So we'll go ahead and move on to the City Manager report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I got a brief report tonight and just want to cover a couple items with the City Council. So just a minute for the clerk to bring up the slide deck. So we have wrapped up a lot of our pavement program in the downtown. I know that kind of ended unceremoniously with everything that's happened as we hit the holidays. And then in 2023 greeted us with a series of storms, which I'll talk about later as part of the staff report. We will be working with the City Council because we think that there's a lot for the council to acknowledge. There was a lot of good work that was done in the downtown. I think it was shared with me that we have not paved the downtown in over 20 years. And so there was a lot of pavement management work, and that also resulted in improvements for both pedestrians and cyclists. There's a lot of new facilities that the council and the community are seeing for the first time. So you may have seen just prior to the holiday, there was a push for media just so that we can get the traveling public to really understand how to use and navigate some of these facilities. We are going to be scheduling a ribbon cutting for all the work. That may seem unusual for a pavement project, but there's some substantial investments that the council's made, and we want to use this as an opportunity to communicate out to the community about some of these improvements. It takes time. We know that, for example, on roundabouts, it takes about 2 years for people ultimately to assimilate and understand the new traffic patterns and then how to use those facilities. And we think the council can be a voice to really then also communicate out some of the new improvements that we're seeing in the downtown. If we move to the next slide, the Eat Local bonus program is in effect. And so throughout the month of January, just to remind everyone, you get a gift card if you spend $100 at local eateries, breweries, bakeries, and coffee shops. You get a $25 gift card for $100. So this is something that we've been working on to replace the restaurant month that was done by Visit SlowCal. The Eat Local bonus program will run from January 2nd to January 31st. And it builds on the success of the Buy Local bonus program. That program sold out this year. We had 4,000 qualified submissions, creating about $780,000 in direct local spending, and 140 local businesses participating. So it was a big success, and we hope to see this happen with the Eat Local bonus program. It's probably going to take some time to get the traction, and this will be one of the items that I think the council is going to look at is your budget deliberations for next year about whether or not to continue a program like this. I think, Greg, if I'm correct, we did this with one-time funding, so this will be one of the items that we'll bring forward to the City Council. Moving to the next slide, I want to just talk a little bit about housing and RENA production. And so here is how we are meeting our need for housing in San Luis Obispo. And this goes back to since 2019. We've permitted 1,619 new housing units. We have until the end of 2028 to build the remaining 1,000, or say we won't build, but to facilitate the production of 1,735 housing units to meet our RENA allocation. As you know, we've got 3 major affordable housing projects were finalized in 2021 with more on the way in 2023. So you'll see as part of the item on the consent calendar tonight, you've got a report on the current status and balance of our affordable housing funds. So be taking a note of that, and then we'll be certainly talking about this because we anticipate there's going to be some gaps in affordable housing projects coming up, some that are very important in our downtown, Anderson, Upper Monterey, the repurposing of Maxine Lewis, the TEMA project. There are a lot of projects out there that are still looking for dollars, and so we'll be talking to the council. You can see where the gaps are ultimately, where we're not really meeting our targets, and that's in the extremely low and very low. And you'll have a policy discussion coming up with flexible density coming in the next couple months in looking at how to stimulate housing and look at potentially flexible density as a tool. And longer term, I think that the council needs to really look at the available land that we have in our inventory and in the city, and then really have a strategic conversation about what are we doing to make sure we hit those goals for affordable housing moving forward. I'm going to switch next to just our response on the 22-23 storm update. And there's an interesting graphic that we've put up here that I think is helpful for everyone to really understand the cycle of response and emergency response. And hopefully you can see all of those details. So we have, on the very bottom at 6 o'clock of the graphic, you can see, and you'll be talking about some of this tonight before the 6 o'clock, you see kind of the preparation, you see the response, and that's largely consumed a lot of staff's time over the last week. We've been in full response mode. We'll be transitioning to recovery mode. And so what are we doing for the 130 plus homes that were impacted by floodwaters, the number of businesses that were impacted by floodwaters? And we're really looking forward and awaiting for determined by the Office of Emergency Services and FEMA whether or not we'll be added as a county that's eligible for individual and public assistance. Interestingly enough, on that wheel, you'll see on this diagram kind of prevention and mitigation. You're having that conversation tonight as part of the climate adaptation and safety element. And so here's your opportunity to really be talking about that. And we're always preparing for emergency response. We're very thankful, and I think it really showed through with our emergency services manager having someone who's always training our team, and then we're also preparing for the different type of events. So we'll be monitoring for the next few weeks some mitigation funding that'll become available. So we do know some of the mitigation funding in talking with Congressman Carbajal over the weekend, likely some funds with the Inflation Reduction Act and also the Infrastructure Act. Those two have some promising funding. We'll see ultimately what matures and comes out of the state budget, and we'll have a chance to meet with legislators over the next few days to see ultimately are we going to see any funding. And then, of course, we'll be looking to take advantage if our county does become eligible for any sort of public assistance. Is there some funding that we can use on repair and or mitigation projects? So we will be planning and conducting an after-action review to improve our response capabilities internally and in coordination with Cal Poly and the county. So moving to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about this last weekend. So staff from our community services group, led by Matt Horn, Aaron Floyd, and Greg Avakian, responded throughout the weekend to added storm impacts and localized flooding. We had staff from Public Works, Utilities, and Parks and Recreation were in the field all day long, responding to downed trees, storm drain clogs, debris flows, waterway impacts, and unexpected impacts of the storm. At one point on Saturday, we had 40 staff members were actively responding to the flooding as saturation caused localized flooding, and we had some staff that were working off-site, particularly our PIO team. As pictured, over 200 tons of debris were removed from Calle Joaquin and the Laguna Lake outflow alone this past weekend. So you may have seen we mobilized at the bridge on Madonna Road as the lake drains out underneath that, and we took advantage to remove both debris and sediment that was impacting the ability for that waterway to drain itself. So as I mentioned earlier on that graphic, we are transitioning from active storm response, and thankfully Mother Nature is going to give us a break. And then we'll be kind of circling back and looking at our damage assessment for recovery and repairs, because ultimately they're tied together. We were able to submit our information to the County Office of Emergency Services by their deadline on Friday. And so the preliminary, and this is a preliminary initial damage assessment, was at $14 million. And so we know we've incurred some additional costs from over the weekend. I had a conversation just before we began the presentation tonight with our controller, Debbie Malakote. She'll be giving a presentation as part of tonight's agenda, talking about the cash side. So we've got some expenses going out the door. That's why we have a 20% reserve in place, and we're going to have to use that because a lot of these expenses were unbudgeted. And so what we'll be teeing up for the council is then on February 7th when we present the mid-year budget, which is our actuals on revenues and expenditures to date and an updated projection. We'll be talking to the council about an initial strategy to try to bridge that gap. Because as you know, if we spend those reserves and if we don't receive reimbursement from the feds or from the state, then we'll have to replenish those. And those will require some budget actions in the future. So we're doing everything we can to try to mitigate those. But I just wanted to signpost that for the council. That's something that we're paying attention to. So moving to the next slide. So this goes without saying. So we encourage all residents to be prepared and alert to future potential flooding as shown on the 100-year storm event map. You'll be hearing from the staff later tonight on the agenda on the climate action and safety element. We're seeing more extremes these days. And we live in a flood-prone watershed. You know, we are a older community that was developed at a time that we didn't benefit from hydrological mapping and modeling. And so much of our development is in the 100-year floodplain. It's not a matter of if, it is when we will flood. And so the blue areas on the screen, just a reminder, are the areas that are in a 100-year flood event. And so we would encourage the community to be prepared and to go to www.slowcity.org/recover to get more information on how to recover from the storm damage and to be ready for the next time. So moving on in the presentation, want to talk about our social media success, and I'll cover this briefly. I know that our outreach to the community is something that is very important. And we put a lot of effort to keep the community informed and engaged. Across all of our social media pages in 2022, our posts garnered about 7 million impressions. We published more content than the average government account at 5.8 thousand posts. We gained more followers on average as compared to our competitive set of 8.1 thousand new followers. And we saw higher than average engagement. So people engaging and then continuing to click on it. So that's one measure we look at to see, well, ultimately, what's the uptake for information? It's one thing to put it out there, but are people actually absorbing the information? And so we want to share this with you. And this has been a lot of work by Whitney Santisi and the rest of the team. You can see all the departments there that have different media platforms, and we'll continue to share that information as we move forward. I also want to share this something that came up after the holiday, is we want to thank Congressman Carvajal for his support for securing with the final budget resolutions that made it through Congress, just over $2 million for the Prado Road Bridge. And just so to separate that in everyone's mind, that is the bridge that's on South Higuera and Prado. It's a critical step in ultimately building the Prado Road overpass. And so the project replaces a functionally obsolete bridge with a bridge that is wider and also supports both ped and bicycle access. So with that, I'm going to ask Hans to step forward. We want to just give the council a bit of a preview because after tonight, the next time that we'll be getting together is at our special meeting at the community forum. And Hans and the team would just like to preview some of the public engagement components of that night.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It's great to see you again. I want to take a brief moment to show you an example of how the different stations will look at the community forum. We're thinking of this as the next version of DOTS 2.0, if you will. We know we love DOTS. On the screen is how a look at how a station will start off. There's no votes, there's nothing on there. Individuals will be able to come up, they can scan the QR code, it will pull up a website where they can pick through different rooms. There'll be rooms for every different station, and then they'll be able to go in there and rank these items. So these are 8 items. This is an example, so it's not final content. This is an example of what the economic development and downtown vitality room would look like. Here's 8 ideas on how we could, as a city, accomplish this as a major city goal. And so the community will be able to go through, rank those items, and then as they go through and finish their rankings, they will change in real time. So here's an example. Okay, so here's, as you can see in the top corner, we've got one person who's responded. This is how they ranked things moved. And so it kind of gives a real-time example, so people get to see that their opinions being counted in real time. They can see the change. As people are working on it, it's actually really cool. In the top left corner where it says active poll, you can actually see how many people are engaging in the survey at any given time. So you can actually see people are responding. And Teresa? Yep. You can see I did a second just random poll, and you see things moved and changed in rank as people respond to the poll. So the idea is that we're giving real-time feedback and looking at how the public can provide input on how we can accomplish our goals. Now, the public may look through this list of goals, and these are, I think, great ways of accomplishing those goals, but they may say, I have new ideas. And so at each station, there will be a second screen, which we'll call the Other Ideas station. And so this station will be, if you would like to share a new idea with staff about how we could accomplish this potential major city goal, this is how we would do it. And they'll be able to flip to either go to the top of the screen and where it says economic development and click and jump to that room. And they'll pop into this one and be able to respond and provide input. And then Teresa, can you click? In real time, they kind of show up on screen. So the first person to respond shows up first, the next one after that, and they just slowly roll down the screen. So as you're standing there providing input to the group, you're seeing your input on screen, so you know you're being heard and seen. All of this is downloadable so that we can easily export it. So we'll be able to provide council with every single response, as well as a summary. So we'll do a summary for the council report, agenda report, but these will be fully downloadable so you can fully transparently see everything in it. It's a pretty exciting change, but it is a change. There you go. Thank you. Oh, I would like to add that we will have staff at every booth to help somebody who's not comfortable using technology to support them. So we'll have an individual dedicated to every station to make sure that if they don't feel comfortable filling in themselves, somebody will fill it in for them using a tablet or a computer on site, and they'll be there the whole time.
Madam Mayor, that concludes the city manager report, and we're happy to answer any questions.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Hans, when you say that there'll be a tablet at each area, does that mean if someone wants to type in their own comments right there at the station, they can as well, if they don't have their own personal phone or whatever?
Either they can type it in themselves or staff can support them in doing it if they don't feel comfortable doing it themselves.
Great.
And somebody could actually be sitting at their own seat in the room and doing it themselves there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so any questions? Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on the digital access. So I know that we told everybody that they'll be able to send in comments via email ahead of time, but will they also have access to this ranking poll that everybody else will have at the actual forum?
We're encouraging people to send comments in via email if they're not available at the community forum.
But they won't have the poll access if they're not at the forum, is that right? Or they will?
It's not public.
So we're still working through this in
Okay.
real time. So I think if you're watching, you could access from home.
Okay.
We're trying to figure out then if that happens and people have a technical problem at home, we won't be able to support them.
Got it.
So we're working through those details, and we'll have clarity for the council when we walk through both people who are live at the meeting and watching from home.
Fabulous. Thank you.
And one question, City Manager, about the education on the bike facilities. Will that education also be for tourists and visitors?
We will get information out via social media, but that's a good question, and whether or not we can make sure that our visiting public also knows how to use some of these facilities. It's something that we've talked about just preliminarily, particularly about some of the planned roundabouts over near Cal Poly and other new facilities that for people who are coming to Cal Poly as parents or students, making sure that they have a little bit of preview and have some education. But that's a good comment.
Thank you. I just know that we have a lot of people that visit via driving and then they bring their they bring their bike and trying to figure out how to utilize everything. And just also really thinking about the training that everyone experienced in Emmitsburg, and I'm sure that really prepared a lot of staff to be prepared for this storm. So again, thank you so much to all the staff who helped us make it through these last couple of weeks. So, any other questions? All right, then we'll go ahead and move forward to public comment for items that are not on the agenda. City Clerk, do you have any comments?
Yes, we have one. Donna Hare Price. Okay, good evening, Mayor and Council. So nice to see you all. Over a month ago, I sat in a queer event safety meeting that was called due to threats of harm from the hate group Gays Against Groomers. Gays Against Groomers and Moms for Liberty often work in tandem to promote hate, intolerance, and shut down and threaten events and people that they deem inappropriate. January 6th has come and gone, and we know that these hate groups are active. And members of hate groups and folks who attended the insurrection are our neighbors. They live here in SLO and in SLO County. For those of us who belong to a targeted group, it's not a stretch to know there are folks here who wish us and seek harm to those who are different. Many of us are afraid that our local police and firefighters hold anti-Semitic, anti-Black, anti-LGBTQ+ views. The FBI published a report warning of the dangers of hate groups infiltrating police departments. The FBI warned that, quote, white supremacist infiltration of law enforcement can result in abuses of authority and passive tolerance of racism within communities served. The FBI also cautioned that police officers who are hostile to civil rights might, quote, volunteer their professional resources to the white supremacist causes with which they sympathize. I know the council, city manager, staff, and Chief Scott and Chief Tuggle want all of us to be safe and feel safe. I urge you all to take active steps to ensure all folks are safe, especially those who are being targeted and threatened by hate groups. All of us suffer when our neighbors are targeted, afraid, and feel unwelcome. I'm asking the council, police, and fire chief for three things. Investigate whether anyone in your employ was at the insurrection. Investigate whether anyone in your employ have current ties to hate groups. Please also make this information transparent and available to the public. Inaction breeds doubt and fear. Your action is the antidote. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments?
No, we do not.
Okay, moving forward to the consent agenda. Do we have any items that need to be pulled from any of my colleagues? Councilmember Pease.
Thank you so much. I don't have any items I want to pull. I do just want to be sure to thank our wonderful partners for the community services and the community development block grants.
Thank you, Councilmember Shorsman.
Yeah, just a comment as well on the, I think it's item 6F. Just wanted to commend our partners in union labor and our city manager and team that negotiated the CWA. I know it's been a long time and lots of negotiating back and forth, and I just really appreciate it. I think that it's a great document, and I hope it sets us up for success for these next two projects.
Absolutely. Without dittoing, I just want to say that I really appreciate all of the work that has come to put the CWA. I know we wanted it in sooner, and it was a lot of back and forth as far as the negotiations, so thank you. And I also want to echo Councilmember Pease and the Human Relations Commission. Thank you so much for going through and working on the Community Development Block Grant Program. So we're excited to help out in every way we can around homelessness and affordable housing and many other items that are in that in those grants. So do I have a motion?
Public comment.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
That's
thank
okay.
you so much.
We have one public comment. Barry Price on 6F.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart and council. It's good to see everyone. Thank you to staff as well. I'm also here to speak in favor of item 6F on the consent agenda, the community workforce agreement for the Prado Road interchange and the public safety center projects. As we all know, CWAs and their subsequent project labor agreements with strong participation of organized labor are the best way to ensure that local workers can gain the skills and training needed for the 21st century economy. And those skilled workers will then have well-paying jobs so they can live and support their families here in these community. I would like to encourage the city to adopt a strong workforce standards policy for all city projects. This supports business and labor by helping reduce staff turnover, increasing wages, heightening professionalism, and increasing advancement opportunities within the building trades. This is the best way to support local workers, build a resilient economy, and simultaneously move us towards our other city goals, including, I'd add, our climate goals, because there really is a really strong intersection there between our climate goals and our workforce. And I want to thank the council for your continued leadership in this area.
Thank you so much. Any other comments? Commenters?
No, there are not.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Jan Marks.
Thank you. Is this on now? Oh, good. I'd like to move the consent agenda.
Thank you, Councilmember Shorsman.
I'll second.
Great. Okay, great. Can we have roll call, please?
Vice Mayor Marks,
Yes.
Councilmember Shorsman,
Yes.
Councilmember Francis,
Yes.
Councilmember Pease,
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes, the motion passes 5-0. Thank you so much. Go ahead and move forward to item 7B, which is the, the annual comprehensive financial report for 21-22. And obviously we have Accounting Manager Debbie Malcote.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Debbie Malacote, your accounting manager and controller, and I'm here tonight to present the audited financial statements for the 2021-22 fiscal year. Sometimes called the audit report, the city's financial statements take the form of an annual comprehensive financial report, affectionately also known as the ACFR. The recommendation tonight is to review and accept the annual comprehensive financial report for the fiscal year that ended June 30th, 2022. Annual audits are required by the city's charter as well as state laws. And the purpose of the audit is to make sure that the financial reports that we're putting out can be relied upon to fairly present the city's financial condition in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, and that the financial information is free from material misstatements. The single audit and the TDA report will be issued separately and are scheduled for your February 21st meeting. The city contracts with an independent firm of certified public accountants to perform the audit. Our current auditing firm is Badawi and Associates. And I will hand it over to Mr. Ahmed Badawi to provide information about the audit work and the auditor's report that was issued.
Right. Good evening. And thank you, Debbie, for the introduction. I think my voice is coming out okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right, so allow me to share my screen. Looks like I need permission for that. There we go. Wonderful. So thank you for inviting me to the meeting today. I will be presenting to you the results of the fiscal year 2022 audit. What I'm going to cover today is I'll let you know who the engagement team was, what were our deliverables and the scope of our audit, the areas of primary audit emphasis, the type of audit opinion we issued, some of the required communication as your independent auditor, a summary of the new accounting standards that were issued, and then see if you have any questions for me. Of course, feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. As for our engagement team, this was the composition of our engagement team. I was the engagement partner. We had a manager, a senior, and 2 professional staff assigned to the engagement. We always have also a quality control reviewer, and they're not listed here on this org chart, but they are usually in the background reviewing my work and making sure that we adhere to professional standards. They also provide a second review of the financial statement. As for the deliverables and the scope of our audit, we were mainly engaged to provide an opinion on the city's annual comprehensive financial report. The city is subject to government auditing standards, which require us to provide an opinion on the internal control over financial reporting. The city is a recipient of federal funds, so we provide an opinion on the compliance with federal expenditures as well. We perform an audit of compliance on the TDA, the Transportation Development Act, on the Whale Rock Commission. We apply agreed upon procedures on the appropriation limit. And then finally, the communication with the governing body, which is what I'm doing today. In terms of areas of primary audit emphasis, most of the areas are pretty standard areas that are a focus area in most audits. The first one is revenue and receivable and the risk of improper revenue recognition. Auditing standards normally require us to assume that this is an area of a higher risk, unless we can justify otherwise. And we really try not to justify otherwise. We just treat it this way, and we focus a lot on confirmation with third parties. So we have direct communication with the county, with the state, with other taxpayers to confirm amounts submitted to the city and reconciling that to the city's accounting records. Also, we perform analytical procedures on the proprietary activities. The second area of risk is the pension and OPEB, the other post-employment benefit. The reason this area is an area of focus is because the dollar amount is significant. It is also complex. It requires the interpretation of actuarial studies and translating that into journal entries to record transactions during the year. So we perform procedures to evaluate the actuarial assumptions, to review the entries made by management to record the activities, and also we test the information submitted to the pension plan by management. We communicate with the pension plan and obtain audit reports from their auditors as well. And then finally, the risk of management override of control. This is a risk that's pretty much exists in any audit. Management are the ones that are normally responsible for designing and implementing internal controls, and they can choose to override it at any time. We were not aware that management have overridden any controls, but we have to plan our audit to minimize that risk. So these are some of the examples of the procedures that we will do to minimize that audit or that risk. As far as our auditor's report, we have issued an unmodified opinion that is basically, in simple terms, a clean opinion. The audit opinion state the standards that we follow, which are the generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. An unmodified opinion means that we believe the financial statements are fairly stated, that accounting policies have been consistently applied, that all estimates are reasonable, and that all disclosures are properly reflected in the financial statements. As far as some of the required communications, on this slide here is a summary of the different responsibilities between the audit firm and management. The audit firm is mainly responsible for providing an opinion on the financial statements. That also include evaluating internal control over financial reporting, evaluating compliance with laws and regulations, ensuring financial statements are clear and transparent, and communicating with the governing body. Management have responsibilities in this process. Management is ultimately responsible for the financial statements. So our service does not relieve management from its responsibility. Management is the one responsible for designing and implementing internal control, for making financial records available to us during the audit process, for establishing controls that would prevent and detect fraud, inform us of all known and suspected fraud, comply with laws and regulations, and take corrective action on audit findings. As far as our independence, this is solely our responsibility to maintain our independence. Of course, we evaluate any additional service that we offer the city, like compiling the financial statements. We evaluate any relationships that may exist between firm personnel and city personnel, if any. We're not aware of any. So we're always evaluating independence, and we believe that we met the standards. We believe that the audit was performed in the time frame communicated. Every year, there are new standards to be implemented, new accounting standards. The most significant this year was the lease standard. All the other ones had minimal impact on the city, but they're always discussed with management and documented. So those are the new ones that were applicable in the current year. Some of the numbers in the financial statements are estimated numbers. So I just wanted to bring to your attention some of those numbers. Pension plan and OPEB plans are the biggest estimates. The fair value of investments, the allowance for uncollectible accounts, all of these are estimated numbers. Also on this slide here, just highlighting to you some of the more significant disclosure in the financial statements that provide some additional information to help better understand some of the account balances in the financial statements. As far as difficulties encountered during the audit. There were some difficulties just really relating to some of the internal control observations that we had in the past, and we have some of them this year as well, which I'm going to discuss. There were some adjustments and reclassifying entries, and management have posted those adjustments. Adjustments normally are the results of either discovering errors or transactions that were not recorded or missed. And this could have happened either by management or the audit firm, but happened during the audit process. There were no significant risk or exposure. Legal matters are normally confirmed with legal counsel. We have direct communication with them to confirm any outstanding litigations. We had no disagreement with management. We had some observations on internal controls. The first couple, the journal entries posting is a repeat of just the controls over the reviewing and posting of journal entries in the system. The notes and loans receivable tracking is relating to some notes receivable that were not reported in the past and were captured in the current year. Some of the significant deficiencies that are less severe are the payroll module still causes the city to have some manual processes and reconciliations that you have, or tracking that they have to do. Also the year-end closing and audit preparedness, although significant improvement, we still think that some additional improvement is needed. And then finally, the control deficiencies are the least severe, and those are the reconciliation between Springbrook and the general ledger on the utility billing side. So these are the observations that we have on internal control. Before we issued our report, we obtained representation from management. And those representations usually is management acknowledging their responsibility in the financial statements and that they have disclosed to us all known facts and circumstances. We are not aware of any significant accounting or auditing matters for which management consulted with other accountants. Normally, if this happens, if management hire another CPA firm to consult on some audit matters, we just want to make sure that they have all the necessary information to provide the most accurate advice. Other than our engagement letter and the representation letter, we had no other communication with management. There were no material uncertainties relating to events and conditions, and we have not become aware of any instances of fraud or illegal acts. Just finally, here is a listing of all the new accounting standards that were issued in the year of implementation. I mentioned earlier that the city implemented the GASB 87, the lease standard. That was one of the most significant one out there. But those are the ones in the future in the next 3 years. Of course, as we get closer, we will have more discussion with management about what it will take to implement those. That completes my presentation. I am more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation and very clear. I feel really great about our accounting. Any questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Pease.
Thank you so much. Great presentation and great result. Always appreciate that. I think this is Ahmed, Mr. Badawi's maybe third year in doing this, and it seems like it's gone a little smoother each time. So I guess I'm just checking in that there was the first year or two, it was a little bumpy as we were getting the motion project and a lot of things in alignment. Are there other kind of system-wide processes that we're still catching up on? Yeah, how's that going?
I think overall, definitely there were significant improvements since we started with the city a few years back. As I mentioned in my presentation, there are a few items that the city is still working on and can use some improvement still, but still came a long way since a few years back. But overall, I would say yes, there are definitely significant improvements.
Thank you.
Debbie, did you want to answer something?
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that we're not finished with the presentation in total yet. We have finished with just Mr. Badawi's portion, and there is more information to come.
So sorry, thank you.
It's okay.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and listen to the rest of the presentation before we ask the rest of our questions. I apologize.
So, just okay.
We're really technology challenged. All right, let's see if we can make this work. As Mr. Badawi indicated, the auditors have issued an unqualified or a clean audit opinion. This fiscal year's operations resulted in an increase in fund balance in the general fund and 3 of the 4 enterprise funds. The transit fund saw significant recovery from the pandemic, however, still had a small decrease in their fund balance from the prior year. The findings that have been mentioned are an auditor's explanation, and they can range from very serious to simply areas for improvement. You're going to hear a lot about CIPs in the coming months, and usually we refer to that as capital improvement programs. Well, in the Motion Project, we coined our own term for CIPs, being continuous improvement possibilities. And the auditors have indicated we've come a long way from where we were, but there continue to be opportunities for us to improve, which they have mentioned already, so I won't go into that. You'll get more information about that in February when we review the single audit. So digging into the numbers a little bit. In the governmental funds, such as the general fund, the vast majority of revenues are derived from taxes. There are some fee-for-service programs like planning and building or recreation programs. But as you see on the slide, 80% of our revenues in these types of funds come from taxes. The local revenue measure has now become our most significant source, clocking in with over $29 million in the fiscal year. And these funds brought in a little over $117 million in total revenue. Governmental funds, as you would expect, spend those revenues on a wide variety of services to the community, things like public safety, streets and transportation, flood control and protection, and capital outlay for critical infrastructure. During the fiscal year, we spent over $110 million in the governmental funds. The general fund, which is the city's primary operating fund, or if you will, our primary checking account, ended the fiscal year with almost $40.8 million. But a lot of that's already spoken for in the form of commitments or contracts that we've entered into, or as part of meeting our reserve policies. There was about $8.4 million unassigned at year end, and I would remind you that the council already took action in October to spend about $6.9 million of that, leaving a little over $1 million that is truly available for future appropriations. As I mentioned, the local revenue measure has now become our single largest revenue source, and it generated nearly $29 million last year. It was used on a variety of critical needs, including about $11 million in new capital projects. You can see on the screen a listing of some of the topics that were covered. In the proprietary funds or the enterprise funds, they operate a little bit more like a business in the sense that they largely don't rely on tax revenues. They rely on revenues from the services that they provide. The city has 4 enterprise funds, and they have all seen recovery from the pandemic levels, which had previously seriously impacted all 4 funds. In the case of the transit fund, there's significant reliance on grant revenues, which are reflected in the non-operating revenue number that you see. The enterprise fund spent just over $40 million last year, and the large numbers you see reflected in contract services in both water and sewer reflect unusual and large investments in upgrading the water treatment plant and the water resource recovery facility. Briefly looking at the city's capital assets, it's probably not a surprise that we own a lot of infrastructure: roads, bridges, sidewalks, pipelines, and a significant amount of those are in our water and sewer funds. Net of depreciation, total citywide capital assets are almost $500 million. And I don't know why we're not advancing, but there we go. The next section of the ACFR is the notes that accompany the basic financial statements. They provide further information and analysis, and they're important to a complete understanding of the numbers, and they should be viewed together to get a whole picture of the operations. This year, we had a new note related to our implementation of the accounting standard related to leases, as was mentioned. We also expanded our note 4, which includes information regarding deferred impact fees for affordable housing projects, which take the form of loans. The financial section of the final section of the ACFR is the statistical section, which provides information on trends. Generally, these are 10-year trend information, as well as revenue and debt capacity. In addition, the section provides some overall demographic and operating information. In addressing some of the auditor's findings, as we heard, there are 4 findings, and these are all things that we get to continue to improve upon. Each year, we get a better and better idea of what the auditors need from us and how to get that information out of the system, and closing our books and understanding the format that they will ask for things, the information that will be requested. This is a continuous improvement possibility. In addition, we're going to be kicking off a project coming up here in February or early March that will address the concern that the auditors have about the payroll implementation and the manual workaround that we've been performing in order to calculate overtime correctly. This year, we also have a finding related to the approval of the journal entries that are auto-generated in the system, and we're exploring how the Oracle system could assist us with some approval workflows. And as mentioned, we have a finding related to recording $3 million in loans related to affordable housing projects from prior years. This should be a one-time occurrence, and we now have systems in place to review this type of activity, so we should not have that happen again. For those of you that don't suffer from insomnia and rely on the ACFR to put you to sleep, we have once again prepared the popular annual financial report, or PAFR. It contains summarized information. It's a little more digestible for the average user, and the PAFR is available on the city's website. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have, or Mr. Badawi is also standing by with questions for him.
Thank you so much. And I see why there was more to go, so appreciate that. Councilmember Francis?
A question on the GASB 87 and the recording of leases. And I know that gets a little bit wonky, and I know that it also kind of put a whole new burden on the finance department this year. So I was wondering if you could just give a very brief overview of what that change was and how it changed the nature of what you were recording.
Yes, it did change the way that we report the leases, both the items or assets that we lease from others and assets we have that we lease out. So we have both. Some organizations have one or the other, but we luckily have both, so we get twice the fun. We really had to go through a pretty extensive effort to identify what all of them that exist throughout the city and to make a determination whether they fell within the scope of GASB 87 or whether they were outside the scope of GASB 87. And there's a lot of things that we think of or we use the word lease that may not fall within the scope of GASB 87. For example, we have several partnerships in the community where we have this $1 a year thing where we'll lease you the building for $1 a year, but you're going to do, wonderful things for our community. And those are the types of things that GASB 87 say that doesn't count. That's not within scope. So it was a significant work effort to go through and identify all of the leases that we had, and then figure out from there, what's the value of those, what's the net present value of those, and then recording those transactions onto the face of our financial statements. That's kind of in a nutshell what we'll do. It won't be a significant work effort every year going forward because we now have systems in place that will help us just identify the new leases that we've entered into just this year. We don't have to look back through, the dawn of time. We can just identify the things that have happened this year. So I don't anticipate it will be nearly the work effort it was in the future, but there's always more accounting standard changes that will continue to challenge us.
Thank you, Councilmember Shorsman.
Yes, and I think it was your second to last slide or near the end there where you mentioned the payroll module finding. Yeah, that one. And that you would have a project addressing that starting in February and March of 2023. I just wondered if you could expand a little bit without getting too wonky again, what that means and what work effort that's going to entail.
Sure, thank you for that. When the payroll module was implemented, there were the calculations that are performed within the payroll system to calculate the overtime rates for employees is incomplete. And so we were getting inaccurate data that wasn't readily apparent when we did all of our testing prior to implementation. So we now have a manual process that we have inserted into our procedures that we apply when we process payroll. So we do a lot of things in the system, and then we pause and we do some manual effort, and then we put that into the system and do the rest of the payroll processing. This project that we're going to be working with a consultant on will correct that. It'll correct the calculations so that we no longer have to do that little manual workaround to correctly calculate and pay the overtime rates.
So was that then causing errors in people's paychecks because the overtime wasn't calculated correctly? And so this new process will help fix that? Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, it would have caused errors if we didn't have this manual intervention. So to be clear, we are paying employees correctly and appropriately for their overtime rates. But that is the crux of the issue. There's a manual process that makes that happen and not an automated process within the payroll system.
Perfect, thank you.
City Manager, did you want to add to that?
I just want to add that this is something, we've got a whole series of projects, and you actually see part of this coming forward as the next financial plan, because there's more work that we need to configure as we've used the system and we've worked with the auditors. There are additional refinements that we have to make to the system to eventually utilize all of its capability. The other factor is we have to take into account is that our memorandum of agreements that we have with our labor partners, some of them, they calculate overtime differently than what's in the law. So we've really stretched even the biggest data consulting firms in the world to figure out how to calculate overtime in the way we do it here at the city. And so we're working on that piece as well. But as Debbie mentioned, we are paying people accurately. We have lots of eyes on it. And stepping way back, when we came and presented this project, back in 2017, one of the ideas is we need to remove manual work and remove the potential for human error and try to automate as best we can. So this is one fix to try to get out of that. One other comment I'll make is on the GASB question from Councilmember Francis is every time we have a GASB pronouncement, it takes us some time to kind of figure out how to integrate it into, in this case, leases. How do we integrate the leases into our statement of net position? What does that look like? How do we catalog that? And so it's usually 1 or 2 cycles that we get it right and, integrate it into our standard processes.
Thank you so much. I remember when this first happened, I think it was right about the time when I came on board on the city council, and the motion transition was very, very challenging. And I know the OT was very, very challenging. So thank you for your work and seeing the improvement. Sitting with Mr. Badawi on our previous call to learn a little bit about today's presentation was a continually pleasant change to seeing all of the work that's been done. I do have one question. When we look at, all the processes and procedures you've changed in the past till now, are there additional things you'd like to see once all of this current findings are taken care of, additional things you'd like to see in the future budget and the processes?
The great thing about Oracle is it provides an endless supply of continuous improvement possibilities.
I'll take that. Thank you.
If I may, I want to jump in and this is a plug for, I think Debbie was being very kind about our capital improvement program and our budgeting. We've got some work to do. We'll continue to have some policy and financial discussion, but the accounting gymnastics we go through today that literally are, pushing us to be at the highest level, Olympic level of gymnastics, just to do basic accounting work for our CIP, we've got to figure out something to get us through in a more efficient way. And so the level of controls we've got to find a point that the council feels comfortable and the community feels comfortable that there's transparency and clarity about what we're delivering and that we're reporting, but have the flexibility when things outside of our control, costs, delays from acquisition of real property, et cetera, when those things happen, which they invariably do, that we've got the flexibility to administratively do something and then report to the council about it. But that's, I think, some conversation that I'm looking forward to having with the council.
I agree. I think when I first came on board, hearing the development impact fees and the way we were managing that was great management, but to be able to read that with transparency was pretty difficult. So many spreadsheets, I'll just say. Well, any other questions from my colleagues? We'll move ahead to public comment.
None on this item.
Okay, thank you so much. I had one more question actually before we go on to deliberation. The payroll module conversation earlier, is that consultant from the one-time money that we agreed on earlier this year or this fiscal
Yes,
year?
that's correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, any deliberation or motions I see ahead? Councilmember Shoresman?
Yeah, I just want to say that although you joke that this is a dry document, I am continuously impressed with how readable the city's documents are in general. Any layperson could, go through, especially the first section and the statistical section, and there's some really interesting tidbits and trends that you can see about tax rates and all kinds of interesting stuff, and then just a really good summary of what the city's doing at the beginning of the document. And I've said this before with our other documents, lots of, just good summaries out there that we can direct the public to. And so if you are looking for, something, some good bedtime reading, I would say that the first section of this and the statistical section is pretty interesting. I just wanted to share something that it's just a super minor, but some would say important error on the page. Noticed it when we were talking with Mr. Badawi on our audit meeting with Councilmember Francis and I on page 40, I believe. There's a letter from the Badawi and Associates, and it states that this report was issued on a date from a previous year. And so I pointed it out to Mr. Badawi, and he said he would make a correction to that.
And we just did that correction, so thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you, City Manager.
That's it. Well, when we get the correction, we'll go ahead and post that, and then we'll submit to GFOA.
Thank you. Any other comments from my colleagues? Well, before we, move forward to motion, I just wanted to say, again, I know I feel like a broken record, but I just really am so impressed constantly in what we do. I think Councilmember Shoresman is absolutely correct, is how if you really care to look at our budget, you all have made it so much easier each and every year for just an average person to just understand, our enterprise funds and, the fact that we can't move money from this bucket to that bucket. There's clear reasons, and you really help the community know, if they wish to, what we do with our money. So Vice Mayor Jan Marks.
I'd like to move the staff recommendation to review and accept the annual comprehensive financial report for fiscal year 2021-22.
Thank you. Councilmember Shoresman.
And again, I'll second it.
Thank you. City Clerk, may we have roll call?
Vice Mayor Marks?
Yes.
Councilmember Shoresman?
Yes.
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Pease? Mayor Stewart?
Yes, the motion passes 5-0. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll go ahead and move back to item 7A. And I believe Community Development Department Manager Michael Codron will be here, as well as Teresa McClish and Chris Reed.
All right, well, thank you, Mayor Stewart and members of the council. I wanted to kick off the discussion tonight by providing a little bit of context. And while it seems incredibly timely for us to be discussing the climate adaptability and safety element tonight on the heels of the worst weather event that we've had in 5 years or likely much longer, I want to take the opportunity to pull everybody up into the canopy. If all of our incredible storm response efforts are happening where all the action is on the forest floor, this plan is about the protection provided by the canopy and taking the time to prepare well in advance for what might come. This is a long-range planning effort, and our goal with this project is to ensure a safe and resilient community. This safety element is very different from elements past. The state guidance for safety elements is now firmly rooted in climate change and adaptability. In fact, this process started in 2018 with the City Council's approval of a grant application to Caltrans to prepare a climate change vulnerability assessment that would become the foundation for the new plan with its focus on resiliency. The outreach and engagement that occurred before and throughout the pandemic ensures that we have a sound safety element going forward that is informed by our vulnerabilities in a changing climate. The plan is fully supportive of our climate action efforts and our emergency operations plan. And although it is not as detailed with specific actions related to decarbonization or natural disaster response, it provides a forward look so that we have the right policies and programs in place to be prepared given our specific vulnerabilities. I wanted to share that one of my biggest learnings through the process of developing this plan is about the meaning of resiliency. I've come to learn that resiliency is not necessarily about bouncing back. We're not necessarily bouncing back to exactly the way things were. In fact, we know from this work that going back to the way things were won't always be possible following a disaster. But by focusing on equity and social justice, which is a new chapter in this plan, And by understanding our vulnerabilities in advance, we will find new ways forward more quickly following a disaster. And that is really what it means to be resilient. So thank you, and I'll now turn it over to Teresa McClish and Chris Reed for the presentation.
Thank you, Michael. And before I begin, I'd really like to briefly acknowledge key staff who had been helping author this update to the general plan, Climate Adaptation and Safety Element, or the CASE. There are many, as this document is multidisciplinary. In particular, Chris Reed here assisting this evening, Lucio Pullman and Freddie Audi and Bob Hill from the Office of Sustainability, James Blattner, and Roger Maggio, Hal Hanula, and Kyle Bell at Fire and CDD, and Shauna Scott and Miguel Barcenas from Utilities. Just really great teamwork here at the city. And you know, when we kicked off this project, we started off with a grant work for this long-range planning project. And it was with the background of several simultaneous events happening in the end of summer 2020, including the COVID, of course, 19 pandemic, a severe heat wave, a persistent wildfire smoke, and civil unrest. So since then, we've worked to, with technical analysis, a lot of remote public engagement, and finally policy development through competing priorities. And tonight, the whole thing is punctuated with an open EOC for flood emergency and recovery. So this project does give us an opportunity to reflect on the value of preparedness and how we can build on the very strong safety policy work from the past and consider the refinements and additions that we can glean from best available science and best practices to continue to bolster our resiliency for the next couple of decades. The recommendation tonight is to adopt a resolution that approves and adopts the negative declaration of environmental impact and amends the general plan safety element. Some background before we begin. The state is very interested in communities, making sure they include climate considerations and adaptation in their general plans, and require cities to do so upon adoption of other elements of the general plan, particularly the housing element. So there's several state laws that precipitated this grant application, and ultimately all the work that is before you tonight for the policy amendment. The document was comprehensively updated in 2000, so it has been a while, although it was amended a couple times, and most recently in 2014 when the land use and circulation elements were adopted. There are also several intersecting state laws that are very integral to this update, including the biggest is the Senate Bill 379, which is the climate change and resilience requirement for safety elements, Senate bills and Assembly bills regarding emergency evacuation routes, Senate Bill 1000 for environmental justice, and then the Alquist-Priolo Earthquake Faulting Act and the National Flood Insurance Program. The major changes to the safety element are the incorporation of climate adaptation and the incorporation of environmental justice. The city did most of this work through the State Adaptation Planning Grant from Caltrans. The project was, as you've heard, referred to as Resilient SLO. The grant was wrapped up in February of this year, but it produced significant technical information and community input that is included in Appendix A of the case document, primarily within the hazard and vulnerabilities assessment. And it has informed the basis of the vision, goals, and policies this evening. This Importantly, the grant work was completed with guidance of the California Adaptation Planning Guide. The city worked with the local government commission, now called Civic Well, and Ascent Environmental, who was procured through a competitive RFP process. Resilient Slow process allowed us to conduct a baseline assessment, assess the city's vulnerabilities to hazards, and help establish the community input process to couple that with the technical analyses to form the basis for the policies before you. Through this project, we were able to co-create with the community members involved a vision for the case, and then derive the goals that would steer us towards that vision. I'm not going to read that for you this evening. It's included in the document, but I did want to, highlight it. It's intended to provide a picture of equitable, resilient communities that thrives in the changing anticipated changing climate and other known hazards. A lot of discussion ensued during the Resilient Slow project about the meaning of resiliency, and I really appreciated Michael's comments regarding that. For the construction of the vision, staff relied on this input and the Resilience Roundtable that was formulated as part of that project, and generally dedicated each sentence of the vision to a goal. I'll speak for a moment about the goals before digging into some of the themes of the policies and programs of the document. The first goal is unchanged from the current document. It is public safety, and it is to minimize this loss of life, damage to public and private property, and social and economic disruptions resulting from injury, death, and property damage. That's the basis of our existing element, and it remains today. Early in the Resilient Slow project, vulnerabilities and hazards were considered within 3 lenses. That was community resilience, natural systems, and the built environment. And community resilience was really highlighted and identified and promoted in this public engagement process and outreach activities, recognizing that all community members are enabled and empowered to prepare for, respond, and recover from disruptions while seizing opportunities to thrive in changing conditions. And in considerations of opportunities to lead by example, we included Goal 3. This is the city government resilience for city facilities, infrastructure, and operations to be resilient, innovative, and continue to cost-effectively provide core functions and services for community members in times of acute disaster and ongoing disruptions. Though equity is emphasized in each component, a dedicated goal is included for environmental justice. And this is recognizing that a diverse and equitable and healthy community where those are disproportionately affected by natural hazards and climate change have the resources and capacity to participate in public processes and have an active role in preparing and responding to future impacts. Goal 5 is about the natural environment, making sure that it's sustained and supports ecological and community health, safety, and natural beauty, provides equitable access to nature, and can adapt and keep pace with dynamic, changing climates. And lastly, the built environment, so that community buildings, public spaces, and transportation systems withstand the natural hazards and escalating impacts of climate change, provide places of refuge, foster social cohesiveness, and minimize injury and loss of life, and equitably protect personal and community aspects. Within this framework, the policies and programs were developed. At a glance, the existing sections in our safety element are fire, flooding, earthquakes and other geologic hazards, city operations, and emergency services. These sections remain or are expanded. New additional sections are a high-impact multi-hazard resilience section, an equity environmental justice section, and extreme heat. I have a slide for each of these 7 sections, so I can briefly discuss why we put them in or why we've made some changes and then the major themes regarding the policies and programs within them. The first is the high-impact multi-hazard resilience section. This section is intended to provide the cross-cutting policies and programs that boost community resilience amidst the unpredictable and compounding threats of fires, floods, extreme heat, and earthquakes. This was an opportunity for us to, take some of the existing policies and the new information and try to really solve for or co-solve for different types of hazards. The major policies and program themes hit on, of course, maintaining community safety and supporting disaster preparedness, making sure we have climate-informed capital improvement programs, engineering standards, and natural resource management, regional collaboration, and climate-smart natural resource management, things like Climate Resilience Hub and post-disaster recovery are all expanded upon in this section. Equity and environmental justice, this is, of course, is new, and while the state includes criteria that necessitates the adoption of environmental justice element, it didn't require us to do so. It does include guidance for communities to incorporate it into their safety element of the general plans, and including this environmental justice aligns with the city's major city goals for DEI and recognizes the intersection of equity, environmental justice, and public safety, and that it's important as impacts of natural hazards and climate change are widely recognized to inequitably affect vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. Focuses on the procedures and policies, ensuring that they're transparent and fair and inclusive and fairly distribute resources and benefits and burdens as the community as a whole faces natural hazards and climate change impacts. The main themes here are civic engagement, equitable civic engagement, empowering community organizations are very critical and important partners. Developing tools, simple tools like our equity checklist for city programs and capital projects. There's very robust looking grant opportunities and trying to seize upon them to establish things such as a community resilience fund. And just making sure that we're accountable in reporting our progress on equity and environmental justice. Flooding. This probably is top of mind. This flooding section considers existing policies and requirements within our floodplain management ordinance and the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan annex for the city. As we've seen, the highest flooding concern for the city is riverine flooding, which may include these flash flood risks. We have also incorporated climate models looking forward, and that were expanded upon in the hazards and vulnerabilities assessment by the technical consultant team and CBEC in particular. Current regulations are generally based on historic flood maps and not future climate models, and these maps are included to provide additional information for planning purposes going forward. The main themes, of course, are making sure we use this available climate-informed flood management information, and we incorporate it into our policies and programs for new development as well as existing development. We're looking at post-wildfire debris flow in particular, making sure, again, we're hitting regional coordination. A big program identified in this effort is the Waterway Management Plan. And other programs include sustainable flood management and open space, vegetation management, and flood-prepared neighborhoods. Extreme heat is new and it's not historically considered to be a primary hazard in San Luis Obispo, as temperatures are generally mild in comparison with other parts of the state. However, we are seeing changes in some extreme heat days, and this is a long-range planning document, and this provides for a long on-ramp as an opportunity to proactively consider measures to address increased heat sensitivity to extreme temperatures, given residents are not acclimatized or prepared for extreme heat conditions. So all of these policies and programs themes are new for the safety element, include looking at climate smart urban heat mitigation, making sure we have equitable access to safe indoor spaces, integrating with the climate action plan for the green and healthy buildings, evaluating urban heat island mitigation. You can see where some of these policies and programs will materialize in other efforts. This climate smart urban tree canopy you spoke about just a few days ago, and also include things like equitable community outreach for extreme heat, so educate the community going forward. And fire, existing policies have been modified to address elevated risk, including smoke and predicted variability and weather and vegetation growth. You see these policy and program themes are existing in our existing element, but are expanded upon, especially in terms of making sure that we're emphasizing citywide fire smart land use planning, new development tools for home hardening, for example, fire smart buildings, and in the relationship with high or very high fire hazard severity zones, and fire suppression infrastructure resiliency is also included in this list. You'll see again a lot, almost in every section, proactive communication on fire risk and prevention, and it's the communication piece, as you've probably noticed, the importance in this recent events is included in just about every section of the safety element update. There's earthquakes and other geologic hazards. What's changed? Well, there's been mostly minor modifications. It's not typically considered as a climate impacted hazard area. However, there are new figures and updates that were required from state guidance and standards, and we've included some of those through our regional agencies, including for subsidence. We've consulted as required by state law with the Department of Conservation and Geologic Survey. They had no comments. And as a note, the figure on landslide susceptibility areas is an informational figure and does not have a regulatory requirement. And these themes are existing and continued in the, as listed here, are existing and continued in the update. And lastly, the city operations and emergency services. This is we've added information, particularly on access and evacuation routes, which was included in state law, and integration of the community resiliency piece. This section, for city operations and emergency services, provides us an opportunity to identify and ensure consistency with overlapping programs, such as in city's emergency operations plan, the multi-jurisdiction hazard mitigation plan, the county's airport land use plan, and also some procedural steps we can take towards community resiliency. It includes the updated critical facilities map and a new figure for SB 99, which is for compliance for areas proximate to hazard areas with limited evacuation routes. and includes several new policies regarding emergency preparedness, as well as some new programs such as clean energy microgrids for city facilities. The integration of a climate lens will occur with implementation of policies and programs over time. This is, again, a very, very long-range planning documents, but we do have each program specified with a timeline and identified lead department that's included in the case appendice in a section D. And additionally, implementation is monitored and reported annually in the general plan annual report. The public outreach, community engagement really, as I mentioned, was conducted throughout the Resilience Slow grant component of the project primarily. We had the Resilience Roundtable continued to meet during the development of the policy piece for the climate adaptation and safety element. The Resilience Roundtable also included 4 working groups. We took the opportunities through the pandemic for conducting 3 community webinars. We've included stories of resilience, and we had 6 surveys, most recently closed just last week. The Planning Commission reviewed the climate adaptation and safety element twice, once in October for a workshop draft and again in December, and are recommending its approval for you this evening. And environmental review and consultations, again, the CEQA document was circulated as required by state law, and we conducted all of the consultations required, including tribal consultations, the California Geologic Survey of the Department of Conservation, the State Board of Forestry and Fire Protection at CAL FIRE. They had several comments that we've included in the document, and the California Office of Emergency Services. And that brings us to the recommendation for you this evening, and that is to adopt the environmental negative declaration and amend the general plan safety element. And again, I'd like to thank the community that's been involved over the last couple of years through the project, through the grant work or the policy piece, and the many staff that's been involved. Chris is here just for ultimate support, and but he is critical in the project. And we have several other staff here, Mr. Blattner, Mr. Maggio, Mr. Barcenas. Can't see who's behind me. I think they're all here, and very happy to answer questions. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a thorough report on all of this detail. And truly, there's no better time to discuss this than in the middle of a flood. I just couldn't believe in a way that this has all worked out to be at the same timing. Any questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Pease.
Thank you so much. Great report, great work. Seeing it all together has just been amazing, so thank you for that. I just have a couple of questions. One is that there is a program through the Slow Climate Coalition, Resilient Slow, or Resilient San Luis Obispo. It has an app, and it seems like there's a lot of overlap, and I'm wondering if somebody could just kind of clarify the role of that program at this time.
Thank you, Councilmember. The Resilient Slow application that the Slow Climate Coalition built is just a naming coincidence. Okay. We advised an alternative name, but ultimately that was their preference because they thought it represented long-term what they were working towards. So we had named this program, our Project Resilient Slow, at the beginning of it, and so that exists. Now there is overlap. The program that they've launched allows households throughout the city and actually throughout the county and region to log in, insert some information about their household, and learn about ways that they can both reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but also save money and become more resilient to the impacts of climate change and other disasters, And in doing so, they can have competitions or create community networks. We know that social infrastructure is so important for resilience. So it is a program that builds both direct physical improvements and enhances social infrastructure.
Terrific. So going forward, I would imagine there'll be some coordination with the city as programs roll out, et cetera. Is that fair to say?
Correct. In fact, today we had a coordinating call, making sure that a couple of the key actions in that included relevant city programs, programs from Central Coast Community Energy, 3C RIN, et cetera, and that we were able to really present our work in a way that was accessible to those community members. So as they logged in and were interested in action and interested in connecting over action, taking advantage of those resources was really intuitive.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. I noticed there was a couple of mentions about traditional ecological knowledge for our Tichu Yaktilhini Northern Chumash tribe, among others. And I'm wondering, I think that we're hearing, globally a lot of benefit from learning more traditional methods. And so has that conversation started? How do we are those resources available locally, that kind of knowledge, or is that a bigger net?
She answered that. She was very much involved in the conversations through, when we did the tribal notifications as required by state law, but Lucia had conversations about the document and about that specifically.
Hello. Hi, Mayor and Councilmember Pease. Thanks for this question. Over the past year, our office has been building relationship with the Northern Chumash Tribal Council and the Northern Chumash Tribe in pursuit of being able to eventually implement traditional ecological knowledge across our open space properties where it's appropriate and where it makes sense and where there's interest from those leaders in our community. And so we're really excited to continue building that relationship. And I think our approach from the city and in our office has been to first understand their priorities and their desires for taking on additional roles or responsibilities or access in open space properties. And so we're going to continue to build that relationship over time.
Nice. Great. Thank you. And it seems like integration with what we were just talking about last week in terms of the tree canopy and those portions. Let's see. A little bit on the timeline. There are many items that are listed in immediate. Is that because they are already in progress within this funding cycle, or is there something going on there?
I think it's both. We are implementing so much of this safety element policy and program document already. And so building on that, is what we intend to do. So yes, we're doing a lot of that. However, the urgency of preparedness is upon us. And so we're also trying to move up what we can, several of the co-solving, items specifically.
Great. I might have a comment or two later, but otherwise those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Shoresman.
Thank you. Great report of just such a culmination, it seems like, of a lot of work and collaboration and implementation of best practices from other places and recommendations from important key organizations. So I can just tell that this has been a lot of work, and we'll probably be glad to have this one checked off the list. Just two questions or areas that I was curious about. There's some mention of schools in the staff report, and it's sort of sprinkled throughout the document, the role that schools will play in emergency responses. And only a couple of schools are listed in the list of facilities in one of the sections. The Laguna Middle School and the high school were listed, but there was no mention of any use of elementary school facilities. So, and I can see some advantages and disadvantages of using those facilities for different things in emergencies. So I just wanted to get an idea of where we sit with what the utility is of those facilities and different types of emergencies, and how much access do we have? Because I know those are run by a different government entity, and the county has MOUs with schools, and so it gets really complicated real fast. So just wondering, as a city, if we had a city level emergency that didn't impact other areas, would we have access to those, and when would we use them?
Hi, excuse me. James Blotler, Emergency Manager, Mayor Stewart, and Councilmember Schwarzman. Thanks for the question. Yeah, so the schools, it's a question that comes up a lot because a lot of times when you hear about evacuation, schools are utilized quickly for evacuation centers, but it does create a lot of times an undue impact on those organizations and the ability to deliver education to our youth. And so many times locally, luckily, there's a very robust system on how these emergency shelters get activated. And the core of that is the coordination with the SLO County Office of Emergency Services and the American Red Cross. So the American Red Cross has agreements established with various locations to establish the shelters in the event of emergency. We saw it just very recently in the past week, where initially right off the bat that they were leveraging a church off of Johnson Avenue. But later on, we're leveraging school at the high school. So they work out those relationships on when they can use those. And we really defer to those expertise and those agreements of the American Red Cross and the County Office of Emergency Services. But we maintain those relationships with our partners in the San Luis Coastal Unified School District. And we bring them in when we do our training for emergency management and EOC exercises. One of the most recent ones that we did with an incident involving a potential airline crash and the impacts of the schools it would have. So they're very much part of our emergency planning and training. But when it comes to leveraging them as shelters, we really defer to our relationships with the county and the Red Cross for utilizing those pre-existing agreements. And that's worked out very well in the past. And we can certainly explore it, as a potential place to go to, but we found that that's best practice statewide following the state emergency management system and just locally having a limited impact to our partners at the school district. Hopefully that answered your question, but if you had additional, I'd be happy to expand.
No, I think that about covers it. That was sort of my assumption because of my background in emergency management, but I thought that maybe in a smaller scale event, so I guess what I'm hearing you say is in a smaller scale event, we would probably still go to American Red Cross and Office of Emergency Services and coordinate that way, even if we needed those resources just alone.
That's right. So through the state emergency management system, really anytime that we exceed the capabilities of our own internal resources, so say we thought maybe Ludwig Center or maybe one of our other community centers, we'd look at that first. But if it didn't fit the mold of what we needed, anytime we exceed our capabilities, we first go to our operational area coordinator, which is the County Office of Emergency Services. And so they work with Red Cross to be able to set those up. Thanks.
Thank you. And then the only other question I had was about the one type of emergency that we've been experiencing for the last couple of years is noticeably absent from this pandemics. And I just wondered if that was intentionally excluded or if we just feel like that's covered in other places in our planning documents, or what, maybe there's just no intersection with this particular safety element.
And in the early part of the document, but ultimately it's embedded, I would say, within the topic of community resiliency. We know we're going to be facing challenges due to climate, due to natural hazards happening in any way, and they're going to have compound effects. And we saw that when we were kicking off the project. And I think that the purview of the safety element to protect property and lives, we stayed within that purview, but recognizing, I don't know what types of challenges and hazards we'll face, but we can certainly outline them to the fullest extent we can with the fullest information we have. So we did try to stick it within the purview of state law safety elements and incorporate just a really general theme of community resiliency along with that.
Thank you. Great work.
And I will add, in addition to that, our emergency operations plan is, incorporated by reference within this. And within that plan, we do have a hazard-specific annex specifically for pandemics. And that was actually recently added since the last update. So we have the framework on how, as an organization, we can respond to those incidents. Unfortunately, we have very recent experience on how to handle it. But there's also the benefit to that too. So we've been able to learn a lot from that, and we also have the framework within our EOP to be able to address that.
And City Manager, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to add that, typically in emergency response, we'll have an agency rep in our emergency operations center. So, for example, in the most recent emergency, we had someone from county, I believe. Yeah, and so if the emergency gets big enough, then we might have a school agency rep in our EOC, and that becomes the way which we communicate about resource needs. And so I think it's safe to say that we wouldn't, if the situation required that we activate an elementary school, we'd work through the agency rep up through county, EOC, and if that was ultimately what everyone agreed upon, then we'd move forward. So the whole system is really designed to really run collaboration, communication, and then those relationships.
Anything else, Councilmember Shorsman? Okay, great. I think that's all the questions we have. Shall we move to public comment?
We have one public speaker, Luke Dunn.
Was just kind of glazing over, it is the Review Climate Adaptation and Safety Element PDF, which is 12 pages as opposed to the 507 document. But anyway, I was just kind of going over and trying to catch up with this, so apologies if these remarks or questions are a bit redundant, or maybe just haven't found it in that lengthy document. But it seems that it was mostly pertaining to SB 1000, and one definition that I was scratching my head with is something that they refer to as disadvantaged communities. And then so diving into what that definition is, and even further in the document, it actually says, while the city doesn't have a state designated, quote, disadvantaged community, I almost beg to differ with so I guess urging staff to maybe revisit if our community could fit or meet that definition of having a disadvantaged community, because it sounds like the current standing is that we don't. But according to the definition, I would argue that we do. And again, that's just the Googling what, how you're defining that. Also, some interesting things on actually defining with income or extremely low income communities or demographics. But then another thing, again, referring to that 12-page document, this was on 8 of the 12. Public engagement, halfway down that page. It mentioned some programs that I actually haven't found yet, and then I did hear that there was a little bit of confusion with the resilient, the resilient San Luis Obispo and that, so maybe that sort of squashed that. But again, where can essentially the community outreach plan be found? I haven't been able to find that. And then how can community members reach this resilient roundtable and working groups that were referenced right in that section? Where can the community members find information on the city's capital improvement program? Not projects, but program. Couldn't find that one either. Page 10 of 12, second paragraph. Oh, this was just, again, it says halfway down that paragraph, including building capacities for the climate resilient through the city's green team. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the city has a green team, or was that supposed to mean the city's sustainability department? Because again, there's the CAT, the Community Action Team, there's the Safe and Clean program, ambassadors for that. So it's just like, but then in particular, City Green Team. I don't think we have one. I was just curious on that. Oh, and then 12 on the very last little part. Yeah, because essentially the conclusion, like what is the recommendation from staff? I'm guess one would be to modify and approve the climate, and I imagine this can be an ongoing thing. So apologies again if it's a bit redundant, but I'm just struggling to get caught up to speed here, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other public comments?
No, there are not.
Okay, thank you. Does city staff want to respond on the community outreach or any other comments?
Thank you, Mayor. I can begin by touching on the disadvantaged community piece. So under SB 1000, under specifically Section 4A, there's a specific definition of disadvantaged communities. They essentially defer to Cal EPA to further define that. And then so it's a mapped thing where there's specific communities are either in or out. And this is actually intentional by the legislature to make sure those parts of our state that have the most environmental justice or disadvantaged communities in them are actually compelled or forced to include an environmental justice element in their general plan. That said, because of our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion as a major city goal, as an overall sort of lens that we view all of our work in, wanted to make sure that even though we weren't compelled to do that, that we included that component of this work anyway.
And briefly to follow up, we took the opportunity, fortuitous opportunity of the San Luis Obispo Council of Government just completing a study that talked about disadvantaged communities and specific regional metrics for that for our county region. And so we are able to utilize that information for our mapping purposes in this, for the case.
Thank you. I think one of the challenging parts around our community is the fact that we don't have neighborhoods of X or neighborhoods of Y. And so I think that creates a space where it's almost how to serve everybody in our community and those who we don't have here going forward. And I think I will say the first time I ever met with Bob Hill and Chris, I was very perplexed that what we were doing around climate was really only for people who had a lot of money. And I really appreciate how you've added in the equity piece and the social justice piece into this element. So thank you so much. Councilmember Pease.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate the cross-departmental kind of integration throughout. Happily, we do have a green team, and to have all the departments and the integration with our climate action plan and our safety elements and all of those pieces. I think it's great. I think it's kind of that trade-off with the resilient slow by another name, and we went through that with Better Building, Building Better. So I understand there's only so many just spot-on names that we have. But the beauty of it is that resilient San Luis Obispo through the Climate Coalition has like 70 Cal Poly interns that are kind of building this resilient network of resiliency. So I really hope that we do leverage that to the fullest extent that we can, because I think that's a lot of opportunity for us there to reach those communities that we might not be reaching otherwise. So I'm thrilled, and if we don't have others, I'd be happy to move the recommendation for approval of the new element.
We do have a couple others, and myself included. Vice Mayor Marks. You just unclicked it.
Okay. Yeah, well, I have to say, reading this document, I feel safer already. Just knowing that it's out there. Just knowing all the thought, and I have to say I was really impressed and moved at the, I think it's brilliant, frankly. It's really incredible. We've been focusing so much with our climate action plan on trying to counter climate change and do the little bit that we can to slow it down. But the safety element is really looking at adaptation, which is the other side of the coin, is that we know the city of San Luis Obispo all by ourselves cannot really stop climate change. Obviously, what's been happening with the storms tell us that. But we do have this basic duty to protect the health, safety, and well-being of our residents. And so I just have to say I think this is really great. And although it didn't come out in the staff report, I do really like the way that what we did, the work we did last week with the community tree, not the urban tree, not the urban forest, the community forest. Thank you. The way that that's integrated in point 9.1, the hazardous trees section. To me, this kind of integration of the open space element, conservation, principles of really handling the natural resources that are within our city, and folding that all into creating a safer environment for all of the people who live here, all of the visitors, and I have to say also the animals who inhabit our area around here. So anyway, I'm really impressed with this, and thank you. And I'll second it if it comes up. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Vice Mayor. I also agree this was a very wonderful plan or element, sorry. And there's a couple things that I see that still need to happen in future things. All the intersectionality of the departments that were created this, I also see when we continue in a few months to talk about our public engagement manual, how do we get more proactive communication? I mean, I think that the city has greatly improved in where we're at, and I think there's so much more that can be done. So how do we be a little more proactive in that? And I also see challenges with the extreme heat section and the homelessness response plan that we'll be discussing in couple weeks. So really just seeing the two of those having some intersectionality that I hope can still be updated in this element in the future. And I know that obviously we do not have to wait 22 years or 8 years to get to that point, but I do see that amendment kind of aspect kind of sooner than later when the other two plans and manuals are done. So just kind of keeping that in mind. And Chris, you mentioned about the competitions and community networks. Was that the Zero Home you were talking about?
Thank you, Mayor. So that's the Resilient Slow challenge that Slow Climate Coalition and others have hosted. Yeah.
Sorry, trying to keep in track of them all. And yeah, I met with the Kristen Hazard and Laura Albers around the College Core and seeing so many great things that the students can help with, and hopefully we see this going forward from future College Core as well. So, and our recently new volunteer coordinator that we'll get to meet soon. So many volunteer options, but well, thank you. That's all I have. Councilmember Shoresman.
Yeah, like I said already, great report, great rewrite of the element. There's a few things in particular that I really appreciated about it. I like the idea about the community resilience checklist for new developments. I think those types of checklists are really helpful, not only for the developers, but for the public to know the types of things that we go through when we're accepting new development in our community. I also like the references to, of course, the environmental justice goal, but also the references to inclusion of marginalized communities in decision making. And I had to kind of take note of how difficult that is and how much ongoing work it is, sort of related to the way the mayor was saying it's something that we continually have to work at and find ways to meet those groups because they're marginalized for a reason, right? It's not easy to get to them sometimes. I also like the separate goal acknowledging the built environment because I think that a strong built environment that takes into account not only the hazards that we face, but I'd also like to see pandemic squeezed in there some way at some point because I think the built environment addresses a lot of the things that we struggle with in the pandemic. And if we build our neighborhoods and our communities in ways where people can be outside easier, can have better HVAC systems, all of those things that keep people healthy will also, not only help us respond to an emergency, but they also just make our neighborhoods nicer to be in as well. And again, just really well vetted by all of the different groups and entities. And I know that takes effort to go out to all those groups, Office of Emergency Services, CAL FIRE, Planning Commission twice, the tribes. That's a lot of work to kind of get all that feedback. So I really appreciate that. So thank you. I look forward to approving this.
Thank you, Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just going to say again that I'm really impressed with seeing how much effort went in, especially just coming from the Planning Commission and having you all present this to us. It's been really cool watching it come up through. And also just watching so many of these elements actually in action over the last couple of weeks and seeing how hard the city's been working to put a lot of these mechanisms in place is really amazing. Also, just glad that we're thinking about and preparing for not only these 25-year events like we likely just had, but also the 100-year events, hopefully not in the near future, but really starting to think about how do we plan for and build for that future. And I think that's just so important as we move into the budget setting that's coming up, that we're really thinking about how to prioritize making sure that we do have a resilient city. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think Councilmember Pease, you wanted to motion?
Thanks so much. I do move adoption of the climate adaptation and safety element.
Vice Mayor Marks?
I'd like to second that, please.
Thank you. And City Clerk, can we have roll call?
Councilmember Pease?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Marks?
Yes.
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Councilmember Shoresman?
Yes.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes, and the motion passes 5-0. What an awesome, awesome job. Thank you. Okay, so next is liaison reports and communications. And before we jump in, I just want to say congratulations to Councilmember Pease and to Vice Mayor Marks for taking on leadership roles in SLOCOG and IWMA. We continue to have, I think, SLO City be leaders in many of the different community groups, organizations. So thank you very much for stepping up and leading. I'll go ahead and ask if there are any liaison reports or communications. Councilmember Shoresman.
Yeah, I think several of us were at the Martin Luther King event at the Unitarian Universalist Church on yesterday. It was yesterday already. Great event put on by the NAACP, and Congressman Carbajal was there before he went out on his tour with the mayor and others. So just always nice to have that time to refocus on who he was, what the legacy he left behind, and just what an incredible forward thinker that man was. So that was a good event, and grateful I had the opportunity to attend.
Thank you so much. I very much agree how that event was wonderful, and really, as we're talking about disadvantaged communities, one of the interesting documentaries they played around the boiled water and the challenges around Jackson, Mississippi was really intense, and also made me feel really thankful that we are in a community that values clean water and being able to get it to everyone in our community. And during the pandemic, we said, let's get the extra generator and make sure that we're making this happen. So Vice Mayor Marks.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to say that, as the mayor mentioned, I was elected the president of the Integrated Waste Management Authority, and our vice president is Robert from Grover Beach, and then the past president is Charles Barbeau from Tascadero, and so that's our executive committee. We have North County, Center County, South County representative. There are a number of new representatives on the board, and we're starting off our next meeting is a field trip to Cold Canyon landfill and all that. And this will be open to the public, and I want to also invite city council members if you want to come along and learn all about and want to talk trash with the rest of us, you'd be welcome to do it. So that's on the 20, I'll send you an email. It's on the 24th, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Along with yesterday's visit with Congressman Carbajal, we actually just got, during our meeting today, that SLO County has been added to the FEMA notice, so very exciting. Got to spend, many meetings and many phone calls discussing the flood this past week, and really excited that we have just active, caring elected officials and staff working on all of our community's behalf. Also, I was really excited that I was asked to join the Black Student Union and get to meet them a little bit on Friday at Cal Poly and record a message for the Martin Luther King event that we will be gone for on January 19th while we're away at the Cal Cities Conference. And just huge thanks to all the volunteers and all the staff for CapSLO, for the 40 Prado, just during this time period of this flood and the amount of people who had to, come out of spaces they've found in our community, public spaces. Creeks have never been safe for someone to stay in, but really not safe during this huge flood. And people were coming to the shelter, and people that had never been really to the shelter or not for a long time coming to the warming shelter and helping them get food for dinners and for breakfast, and looking at how we can help support CapSLO going forward with a little bit more when it comes to breakfast and dinners and protein versus just carbs. Working with Jack Leahy and members there, saying what can we do to help improve nutrition. So that's been really exciting. And also County Supervisor Don Ortiz Lake was very active in helping with that too. And lastly, I'll be with Councilmember Shoresman and Francis and City Manager Johnson at the Cal Cities Conference this week, where I'll be doing a little bit of orientation makeup for the Cal Cities Community Services Policy Committee and the African American Caucus that we'll be having a quick meeting on the 19th as well, since I'm on the board for that. And that is all the many things that we have going on. And unless there's anything else, I don't see anyone else. Okay, then we'll go ahead and adjourn, and we'll see everyone at the scheduled special meeting for the 23-25 Financial Plan Community Forum on Thursday the 26th at 5:30 at the Ludwig Center, and then return to our regular meeting at the City Hall on February 7th. Thank you so much, and good night.